Welcome back everyone to more NASCAR Heat 4 at Knee Pit Gaming. Today's setup video takes us to Homestead Miami Speedway. And while Homestead Miami might be another mile-and-a-half track, it certainly does not race the same as the other mile-and-a-half tracks in the game. And the primary reason for that is the shape of the track itself. Normally, whenever we go to a mile-and-a-half track, you're looking at either a dogleg or a tri-oval on the front stretch, and Homestead Miami is more of a traditional oval setup. That's basically going to mean that your entry into turn 1 as well as your exit off of turn 4 are going to be very different than what you're used to. So that means a little bit different driving style is probably going to be needed here. Now with Homestead Miami, it is famous for having multiple grooves, and you see guys running right up next to the wall, and that is certainly no problem to do, but the low line is also a very viable groove as well. Now in the thumbnail as well as the title for this particular video, you notice that I only emphasized the cup cars. And that's simply because I didn't have enough time to really dedicate to either Xfinity or the trucks, but when we're in the setup itself, I'm going to give you some adjustments that should help you out in those two series as well. One of the big changes for the physics in NASCAR Heat 4 is the addition of tire wear. Now, tire wear is going to have a huge effect on the setup that you're running, so it makes sense that we need to, before we get into setup discussion, talk a little bit about the options that I use while I'm testing for these setups. So we'll start off in the options menu under the gameplay tab, and then we're going to scroll down to tire wear and fuel consumption. Normally I do this on 2x. I don't like to go any higher because I do like long green flag runs, but I understand that some of you like to go all the way up to 4x. Player tire wear rate, I like more wear. I like maximum tire wear, so I generally test on more wear and less grip under the grip fall off. So keep that in mind. If you're playing with different settings such as less wear and more grip, then that's going to change the setup that you're going to want to use in the races. So keep that in mind as we're talking about setups. What I'll try to do in each video is let you know the particular settings, because I don't go for maximum tire wear at every track, just where I feel that it is appropriate. And also keep in mind on the driving tab, there is a setting that you'll need to match up for the AI. So if you want maximum tire wear, then you need to have that on both the player car and the AI car. Or if you're going for less tire wear and more grip, then change that for the AI as well. I didn't spend a lot of time at Homestead working on pure speed. Instead, I focused on the long run setup. In particular, I did a lot of testing in 4X, maximum tire wear, maximum grip fall off, just so that I could make sure that the car was the most stable it could be over a full fuel run. And the good news is, in my testing on 4X, I never really had any issues with tire wear. I ran out of fuel long before I ran out of tires, and the car was stable throughout the entire run. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, particularly at the end of a run, if you're running 4X, then probably the last 4 or 5 laps or so, you're going to need to be very careful on corner exit with the setup I'm going to show you. And that's because this setup is designed to rotate while also allowing you to keep the car under you on corner exit, but you might need to ease back into the throttle, particularly on corner exit in those last few laps of a run. As I mentioned earlier, this particular setup is designed around the long run, but as we go through the different parts of the setup, I'll be giving you ways that you can loosen or tighten the car in order to suit your own individual needs. Now, we'll get started in the shock settings. Something a little bit different here. My traditional 3.5 settings definitely work here. In fact, that's where I started, but I like to be a little bit more aggressive with the shocks here just to control the rotation and the balance of the car overall a little bit more. So that's why you see a little bit higher numbers here than the traditional 3.5 settings. The higher the numbers you use on the shocks, the stiffer the car is going to feel. It's going to react quicker, but you also have to be careful with its behavior over the bumps. There are certainly some bumps to deal with here at Homestead, so keep that in mind as you're adjusting the shocks, whether overall front to rear or if you're in individual corners. Moving on to the weight settings, 52% front weight and 53% wedge. Those numbers are high enough to give some stability to the car. Front weight and wedge are really all about controlling the rotation of the car. The front weight primarily for corner entry and keeping the car stable. If you want to loosen the car up on corner entry, one of the options is to reduce the amount of front weight in the car to maybe 51.5 or even 51 or less, and that will certainly help the car to rotate better on corner entry. If, on the other hand, you're too loose on corner entry, then one of your options is to increase the front weight to 52.5, maybe even 53 or so, and give that a shot. The wedge is more for overall rotation of the car. If you find yourself with the car really unstable, particularly when you're turning the wheel, then increase the wedge a little bit and see if that doesn't stabilize the car for you. On the other hand, if you're finding that the car is just too tight and it won't rotate the way you need it to, one of the options is to reduce the wedge number to maybe 52.5 or even 52 and see if that helps you out. We're moving on to the spring settings, 1,100 pounds and 1,200 pounds in the front of the car. And that is because I like a stiffer platform, particularly here because you lean on the car quite a bit in the corner. So I like the car to be very stable, and that's why I'm using the maximum right front spring. If you need the car to rotate better on corner entry, then increase that left front spring and or decrease the right front spring. So if you use something like a 1,200 pound left front and maybe 1,100 pound or even 1,000 pound right front, then that's definitely going to help the car to rotate on corner entry. On the other hand, if you're feeling that the car is too loose on corner entry, one of your options is to simply reduce the left front spring, which will give you more split between the left front and the right front and should tighten up the car nicely on corner entry. Moving to the rear of the car, you can see that I'm using no split in the rear springs, 550 pounds on both the left rear and the right rear. That is for the stability of the car on corner exit as you get later in the run, particularly if you're using 4X, maximum tire wear, maximum grip fall off type conditions. If you need to make the car looser, particularly under throttle, then increase that right rear spring, give some split between the left rear and right rear, maybe go to something like 550 and 600 or maybe even 500 on the left rear and 600 on the right rear. That will certainly help to free the car up under throttle and loosen the car overall. On the other hand, if you're finding that the car is just too loose, particularly when you're getting back to the throttle, or the car just over rotates and loses some stability, then lower both of the rear springs. So maybe try something like 450 in both the left rear and right rear, and that will certainly tighten the car up and reduce the amount of rotation you're getting in the corner. Now, tire settings, I didn't spend a lot of time on it. I just wanted to get it roughly to where it felt good. But keep in mind, the more you increase the tire pressures, the faster it will want to go in a straight line, but it won't quite have as much grip in the corners. But if you reduce the tire pressure settings, then the car will generally have more grip overall and feel more stable. Moving on to the miscellaneous settings, plus 3 degrees of camber in the left front, minus 1.5 degrees in the right front. You can use quite a number of different camber settings and they work just fine. I tried out several and ended up going with the plus 3 and negative 1.5 simply for tire wear reasons and the overall stability of the car. You can certainly get by using more or you can get by using less. It's all a matter of personal preference more than anything. The front sway bar is at 1.315. That's a setting that has really worked well for me so far in NASCAR Heat 4, and it worked well here at Homestead as well. But if you're finding that the car is too loose overall, you need to take some rotation, you need to tighten the car and stabilize the car a little bit more, then increase that front sway bar to closer to 1.5 or even higher, and that will certainly tighten the car. If, on the other hand, the car is too tight for you and you want to try to loosen the car and help it rotate more, then lower the front sway bar, and that will certainly point you in the right direction. Next up is the track bar, and you can see that I'm using 13 inches on both the left side and the right side. I use the left side mainly for corner entry, so if you need the car to rotate more on corner entry, increase the left side track bar. If you need more help on corner exit, then that's the right side, and you'd want to increase that. But of course, if you're too loose overall and you need to tighten the car up and you feel like the car is over rotating, then lower the track bar on both the left and right hand sides, and that will certainly tighten the car. Brake bias, not something I really use at this particular track unless I'm in a lot of traffic and a lot of lap traffic in particular. But anywhere from 70 to about 75 seems to work just fine for me. Grill tape, 45% is, I don't believe, the most aggressive you can get here, but the main thing for me was since the grill tape really doesn't do anything for the handling of the car, I just made sure it did not overheat the engine, and that's all that really mattered to me. So 45% worked just fine for that. Wheel lock at 10 degrees, steering offset at 0.05, both standard numbers for me, but as always, feel free to tweak those to your own personal preferences. Now the gear settings, by default, the game likes to change up the fourth gear to about, I believe it's 0.90 or maybe even 0.95. I prefer to use a 1-to-1 fourth gear because that's what I'm used to in the Cup car. So you'll need to adjust the gear ratios depending on that fourth gear and rear end ratio and how they work together. The higher the number you use in the rear end ratio, the more RPMs you will turn and the looser the car will be under throttle. On the other side, if you lower this number from the current 333 to say 325 or even something like 310, then you're going to reduce the RPMs and you're going to tighten the car under power. Now there is quite a bit of adjustability here. 333 is certainly not going to reach max RPM at the end of the straightaway. So you've got room to move up to around a 340, or you can certainly reduce the RPMs if you want to tighten the car. So that's going to do it for the Cup cars. As I mentioned, I didn't spend much of any time in either Xfinity or the trucks. But if you're looking to move in that direction, then generally they are much tighter in how they drive for me. So I would be looking in those two series to loosen up the car. The first things I would be looking at would be over in the weight settings. I'd be looking at reducing the front weight. I'd start at probably something 51.5, maybe even 51.0. And I would also look at doing the same thing in the wedge. Reduce it 0.5% or up to a full percent. Test that out and see how that works for you. And then if I still needed the car to rotate better, then I would move over to the springs. Maybe try something like we talked about earlier to loosen up the car and help it rotate more. I might try something like this in the front, 1,200 pounds in the left front, 1,100 pounds in the right front. Then moving into the rear of the car, I might try something like this, maybe a 500, 600 pound combination in the rear of the car. And just these combinations alone, from the weight settings to the spring settings, will certainly change the handling of the car and help the car to rotate much more than the original setup that we were looking at. That's going to do it for today. Thank you very much for joining me, and stay tuned for more NASCAR Heat 4.